Okay, so it's Monday, February 16th, 2026. And, as you're listening to this, you might actually want to check the news. Because right now, in Geneva, a fleet of armored motorcades is pulling up to the Intercontinental Hotel. The security there is tighter than it's been in decades.
It's quite a scene. You have the Americans, the Russians, the Ukrainians, all of these delegations that haven't been in the same room, at least not at this level, in years. And the atmosphere, it's not just tense, it's confused.
And the stakes. I mean, they're basically world peace, or at least a very, very expensive version of it.
Yep.
Because the talks starting tomorrow, Tuesday the 17th, they aren't just about ceasefires or, borderline.
Oh, no, not at all.
They're about money.
Massive amounts of money.
We are doing a deep dive today into what our sources are calling the Witkoff Doctrine. It's this, radical shift in American foreign policy that has quietly and pretty controversially taken over since about January of 2025.
And it's a shift that has a lot of people nervous. I mean, we're looking at a strategy that asks a fundamental, almost taboo question. Can you solve the most brutal wars of our time, Ukraine and Gaza, by treating them like distressed real estate assets?
That sounds incredibly cynical.
It is cynical, but it's also an $800 billion bet that puts business deals ahead of treaties.
So let's get into it. We're going to unpack the source material from the Global Review, specifically the analysis by Fareed Novin, to understand if this is some kind of masterstroke of deal-making or if we're just watching a geopolitical bankruptcy play out in slow motion.
Let's do it.
Okay, first off, let's talk about the name on the door here, the Witkoff Doctrine, for listeners who don't follow, Manhattan real estate columns. Who is Steve Witkoff? Because he's not a career diplomat, right? He didn't spend 30 years at the State Department.
Oh, far from it. Witkoff is a hard-nosed New York developer. He's been in the trenches of Manhattan real estate since the 80s. I mean, before being appointed special envoy in 2025, he had basically zero diplomatic experience. His world is interest rates, zoning laws, leverage.
So how does a guy who builds skyscrapers end up coordinating peace talks with Russia? It really feels like hiring a plumber to perform heart surgery.
And that's the core of the doctrine. The administration's view, and this comes straight from the top, is that traditional diplomats are obsessed with process, with protocol, with all these niceties. They wanted fixers, closers. The source material actually calls this shift financialized diplomacy.
Financialized diplomacy. It sounds like a buzzword you'd hear at a fintech conference. Break that down for me. What does that actually mean when you're sitting across the table from, a warlord?
Well, think of it this way. Traditional diplomacy is about security. It's, I have more tanks, you have fewer tanks, let's draw a line on a map to keep us safe. Financialized diplomacy sees a war zone not as a security crisis, but as a costly inefficiency. It's a market failure.
So it's not about ideology, it's not democracy versus autocracy?
No, it's all about the balance sheet. The theory is that, major conflicts destroy capital. So if you can structure a reconstruction deal that is profitable enough for everyone, and that includes your enemies, then the fighting will stop because it's just bad for business to keep shooting.
That implies everyone has a price, even Putin. Even Hamas.
Exactly. It's purely transactional, and that's where the friction comes in. Novin's report highlights this detail that, it really stuck with me. It shows just how different this is. By late 2025, Witkoff is negotiating directly with Kirill Dmitriev.
Is he?
He's Russia's chief economic negotiator, not a general, an economic guy. But here's the kicker. Reports surfaced that during these meetings, Witkoff was using Kremlin translators.
Wait, hold on. He didn't bring his own State Department interpreters? That seems insane. Isn't that diplomacy 101? You bring your own people so you know exactly what's being said.
Allegedly not. The argument from Witkoff's team was that it streamlined the rapport. It was faster. But you can just imagine how that went down in Washington and Kiev. It signaled he wasn't there representing the U.S. security apparatus. He was there to cut a deal by any means necessary.
It sounds like he was bypassing the entire bureaucracy.
He was. And the early drafts of the peace plans he was working on, well, they allegedly required Ukraine to cede territory in exchange for economic access. So right from the get-go, this business-first approach was rubbing traditional allies the wrong way.
Okay, so the philosophy is treat the war like a distressed asset. Let's look at the actual asset on the table. Ukraine. What's the price tag?
This was the bombshell at the World Economic Forum in Davos just a few weeks ago, in January. Witkoff gets on stage at the Ukrainian breakfast, which is usually a really somber event, and he's just beaming. He unveils the prosperity framework, the headline number, $800 billion.
800 billion with a B. That's nearly $1 trillion. That is not pocket change. Where is that cash supposed to come from? Because I have to assume Congress isn't writing that check, not in this political climate.
You assume correctly, Congress is being very tight-fisted right now, and this is crucial. This is private capital, which is why they brought in Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, as a prosperity advisor.
And BlackRock, the people who own everything.
Pretty much. They manage over $14 trillion in assets. Bringing Fink in was a signal to the global market. The message was loud and clear. Ukraine is open for business. The plan is to just flood the zone with private investment to rebuild everything: infrastructure, energy, housing.
But this is where I get stuck. If I'm a global investor, say I run a pension fund in Ohio, I'm looking for stability. Ukraine is still an active war zone. Missiles are still flying. Why on earth would I pour billions into a power grid that might get blown up next Tuesday?
And you've just hit on the Davos disconnect. The administration is offering sweeteners, like a proposed tariff-free zone for Ukraine to jumpstart exports. They want to turn Ukraine into a tax-free manufacturing hub for Europe.
Which sounds great on paper.
It sounds fantastic on paper, but the investors, they're skeptical. Actually, skeptical is being polite. They are terrified.
And the source mentions we've tried this before, right? This isn't the first Rebuild Ukraine fund.
We have. Remember the Ukraine Development Fund back in 2023?
Vaguely, that feels like a lifetime ago.
Well, it aimed for $50 to $80 billion.
Right.
It was quietly shelved in 2025 because they couldn't even scrape together $15 billion. And the reason was simple. Money is cowardly. It flees risk. Larry Fink has been very clear about this in private meetings, and the source notes this. He says he needs durable ceasefires and legal guarantees. You can't just promise a tariff-free zone. You need to promise that the factory won't become a crater and that the government won't just change the laws on you overnight.
So Witkoff is promising $800 billion to get peace, but the investors won't give the $800 billion until there is peace.
Precisely. It's a circular dependency, a chicken and egg problem on a global scale. Witkoff is betting he can bluff the peace into existence by waving this checkbook, but the check is blank until the war actually stops.
And while they're trying to solve that massive paradox in Europe, they're applying the exact same real estate logic to the Middle East. And this is where the visuals get, truly wild.
It really is the same playbook, just with a different developer. This one is Jared Kushner's baby.
He's back.
He's back. And he also unveiled this at Davos. He calls it the new Gaza. And if you look at the descriptions of the AI renderings they showed to investors, it's just jarring. It doesn't look like a reconstruction of what was there.
Describe it for us. What are we looking at?
It looks like Miami or Doha. Seriously. We're talking about glass skyscrapers, 170, 180 mixed-use towers, waterfront developments for coastal tourism, industrial zones for data centers, and something called a new Rafah.
Coastal tourism in Gaza.
That is the pitch. The economic projections are just as ambitious. They're projecting a GDP of $10 billion by 2035 and 500,000 new jobs. It's this vision of a high-tech commercial hub on the Mediterranean.
It sounds like a brochure for a luxury resort, not a reconstruction plan for a place that's been leveled.
And that is exactly the criticism. The report calls it the real estate mindset. It treats Gaza as if it's just vacant beachfront property.
Vacant, that is a very loaded word. There are 2 million people living there.
Right. But the plan seems to view the current population and the refugee camps places with deep history, like Jabalia and Beit Lahia, as obstacles. In those AI renderings, the historic neighborhoods are just gone, replaced by glass towers.
That feels, completely disconnected from the reality on the ground. Did they consult any Palestinians on this new Rafah? Did they ask the people living in tents if they want a data center?
According to Novin's analysis, no. There's zero mention of Palestinian consultation. There's no clear governance framework. It's a top-down, build it and they will quiet down approach. It just assumes that if you give people high-tech jobs and nice apartments, all the political grievances and historical trauma will just evaporate.
Which is a massive, massive gamble. You're betting that economic prosperity cures political ideology.
Sure.
You can buy your way out of 100 years of conflict.
And that requires full disarmament of Hamas before a single dollar is spent. So again, just like in Ukraine, the money is contingent on a security reality that doesn't exist yet.
So we've got the Ukraine plan, $800 billion waiting on a ceasefire. We have the Gaza plan, a sci-fi city waiting on disarmament. And all of this leads us right here to today, the Geneva talks. Because this is where the rubber meets the road.
It is. And we have to be fair here. The deal-making approach has had some tactical wins leading up to this. We can't say it's been a total failure.
True. The report mentions the Abu Dhabi talks in January. They did get a prisoner swap done. Over 300 people are home. That's real. That matters to real families.
It's huge. There's also a temporary truce on energy infrastructure to get through the winter. So Witkoff and his team can point to the scoreboard and say, look, we're getting things done. We're talking.
But then we hit the Munich Security Conference. This was just a few days ago, February 13th.
Yeah.
And the vibe shifted dramatically. It felt like all that momentum just hit a brick wall.
Completely. If Abu Dhabi was about tactical deals, Munich was about strategic deadlock. President Zelensky gave a speech that was just blistering. He stood in front of images of missile attacks and said, quote, Putin cannot live without war.
So he wasn't asking for the tariff-free zone.
No, he barely even mentioned the money. He demanded a minimum of 20 years of security guarantees. He was crystal clear. Economic promises are nice, but they don't stop missiles. He needs hard security. He needs NATO or something that looks exactly like it.
And it wasn't just Zelensky. Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State, made a pretty telling admission at the conference.
He did. He admitted that the talks have narrowed to, and I'm quoting here, the hardest questions to answer. He's talking about territory and sovereignty, the stuff you can't buy.
And let's not forget the Europeans. Macron sounds furious in this report.
Europe feels alienated. And think about it. The U.S. is asking Europe to backstop the debt, to provide the guarantees for that $800 billion, while the U.S. manages the deals and takes the credit. Macron warned that any peace without European participation will not bring peace. It's a very fragile coalition.
So that brings us to right now. The delegations are in Geneva. Witkoff and Kushner are there. But look at who Russia sent. That tells a story, doesn't it?
Oh, it tells a huge story. For the Abu Dhabi talks, Russia sent military negotiators, generals, men in uniforms. For Geneva, starting tomorrow, they've switched it up. They sent Vladimir Medinsky.
And remind us, who is he?
He's a hardline politician, a former culture minister. He's a blood and soil kind of nationalist, a close Putin ally who literally rewrote Russian history textbooks. And they also expanded the delegation to include economic negotiators.
So they're bringing the ideologues and the economists, no generals this time.
Exactly. This signals Russia wants to talk about the big stuff. Territory, sanctions relief. They're not there to discuss a ceasefire line or where to park the tanks. They're there to redesign the map and the global economy. They want to talk about lifting sanctions in exchange for, well, that's the big question.
So we have this fundamental mismatch. The U.S. is offering reconstruction money. We'll make you rich if you stop. And Russia is fighting for territory and security guarantees. Can those two things even be traded? Can you swap land for cash?
That is the trillion-dollar question. Our source, Fareed Novin, actually ran a Bayesian scenario analysis for mid-2026. Basically, calculating the odds of what happens next based on all these inputs.
I love a good probability check, even if it's terrifying. So give it to me straight. What are the numbers?
Well, you might want to brace yourself. The most likely scenario, he puts it at 60%, is stalemate.
Stalemate, so no deal.
No comprehensive peace. The tactical progress continues, so maybe more prisoner swaps, maybe some grain deals, but the war itself grinds on. And the reason is because Russia refuses to trade land for investment, and Ukraine refuses to cede its land for cash. The Witkoff Doctrine just hits a wall of hard power. The money stays on the sidelines because those security guarantees never come.
Okay, so 60% stalemate.
Yeah.
What's the best case scenario? What are the odds that Witkoff actually pulls this off?
The financial settlement scenario, he gives that a 20% chance. That's the one where the Witkoff Doctrine actually works. Russia accepts economic reintegration, Ukraine gets the $800 billion and a path to the EU, and everyone goes home relatively happy.
20% isn't exactly a sure thing, so what's the risk?
The other 20% is escalation. The conflict spills over, maybe into the Black Sea, maybe gets deeper into global supply chains. If the talks completely collapse and the deal is taken off the table, things could get much, much worse.
That's a sobering assessment. Looking at all this, the $800 billion, the glass towers in Gaza, the meetings in Geneva, it feels like we're trying to apply business logic to something that's deeply human and emotional.
That really is the crux of it. The Witkoff Doctrine is innovative, for sure. It's trying to use capitalism to solve war. It's an attempt to modernize peacemaking. But as we wrap up, we have to face the reality that Novin points out. Money cannot buy safety from missiles, and it cannot guarantee sovereignty.
It reminds me of that old saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, when all you have is a checkbook.
Everything looks like a transaction.
Exactly. And as Witkoff and Kushner sit down at that table in the Intercontinental Hotel tomorrow, they are betting everything on the idea that every adversary has a price, that everyone wants to make a deal.
But history would suggest otherwise. Sometimes nations fight for things that simply aren't for sale. Identity, land, survival.
A provocative thought to leave you with. What happens when the thing your opponent wants, territory, history, security, isn't even on the menu?
We might just find out tomorrow.
We certainly might. Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll be watching Geneva closely.
Until next time.